The Annapolis Opera has had a long, rich history of bringing in emerging artists. So in our 51 years, we have had many artists of color on the stage and behind the stage, because it's part of our mission to support and provide opportunities for arts professionals, whether they're a performer or administrator or technical staff. So, though we've had a really rich history of partnerships with arts schools throughout the region, we're very proud of the fact that we have worked with Coppin State, which is a historic Black university in Baltimore, and provided internship through their theater program, which is something they were lacking. And we've been able to partner with them. And that is an ongoing friendship that we're continually trying to expand. And we're doing this through a special program we called our Lift Every Voice Initiative, which is dedicated to Professor William Ray, a famous Black opera singer who was one of our board members and also responsible for our vocal competition. So, our recent past, we've been really fortunate to have a co-commissioned opera called Sunder with the University of Maryland Music Department. This presented two young Black women artists who wrote this opera specifically for this program, and it engaged not only the University of Maryland's students, but also we brought in artists from the Annapolis Opera, and it reflected the story of a Black police officer in a small town trying to cope with the racial inequities he was seeing and how to deal with protests addressing those inequities within his community. It was very powerful, and we were able to get speakers to come have a community discussion about the work after it was presented. So we were very proud of that. It was a very important step in the careers of these young artists.
Okay, Kashonna Marrow is an engaging speaker, an inspiring coach, a motivational author, and an insightful corporate trainer. She's the president and CEO of Simply Kashonna, a business built to promote bold, fearless, and courageous living. She goes beyond surface issues to address the challenges that inhibit personal, professional, and spiritual growth, leading her clients to embrace their evolution. It might be revolution too in there sometimes. But, and I can attest to that. I know her personally, and I was one of her clients at one time. So she really does practice what she preaches. And so I'm really excited to introduce to you all Kashonna Marrow. So you're gonna go down. You're gonna press the down arrow.
Press the down. Okay, awesome. Do I have to use the microphone? I do. I have to use this microphone? Okay. I have to get all the instructions before I do stuff. Well, great afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing this afternoon? Yes, you're doing great. It is so not fair that I get the after lunch section. Angela, we're going to have some real conversation around that. Well, I'm excited to be with you this afternoon and speak with you a little bit about unconscious bias, which definitely is a huge part of DEIA, BJ initiatives. Right? And when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, belonging, and justice is the BJ part of that, I want to make sure that I'm always clear about what those acronyms mean, because sometimes we take for granted that people just know what they mean. So when we're doing this type of training, it is always important that we take time to really explain what these acronyms are. So again, we're going into unconscious bias, and I'm going to get moving now. How many of you have ever seen this beautiful wheel? Seen it? Yes, yes. So as you can tell here, normally when people hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, their mind immediately races to race. It immediately goes to black and white. And we see here that in the center of this wheel, there are 6 different components of diversity. But what I want to do today is I want to draw your attention to the outward parts of the will, where you see background, communication styles, appearance, political ideology, marital status, and it goes on. Why am I asking you to focus on those parts of the will? Because those are the parts where we find our biases. Think about it. If someone tells you they're married, you look at them a certain way, or you think of them a certain way. If someone tells you they're a single mom, you think of them a certain way, or a single dad. If someone tells you they were in the military, if someone says something about their religious beliefs, we all have biases. And what I want to do is I just want to make sure that I get you all nice and relaxed and, I don't want you to feel tense about having a bias, because all of us have them. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you through what this looks like. Our biases can prevent us from having these authentic relationships that we see, especially in places like this where we're coming to learn, but our biases can block us from receiving the information and from even having authentic relationships, whether it be at work or at school. But when we're talking about unconscious bias or implicit bias, they are attitudes, they're held subconsciously. Now check this out. Subconsciously, and they affect individuals, how individuals feel and think about others around them. So I want you to think about that for just a second. If I think something, then whatever is in that thought or whatever is in my mind, it impacts my mindset, and then it impacts my behavior, or it affects my behavior or how I behave with others. Well, we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second to see what we need to do in order to shift that thought pattern. So where can I find this bias that we're talking about here? Well, we can find it everywhere. We can find it in team meetings. We can find it in group discussions, even your breakout sessions. There was some bias going on there. We can find it in the hiring process, brainstorming sessions, other work-related meetings and events. I want to highlight this very important point that we have here. Over 99.9% of our thoughts are processed unconsciously. Like, I didn't know I was thinking that. And we've all heard it. We've all heard someone say, I didn't realize that I knew that, or I didn't realize that I would say that. Because you have been thinking, or your brain has been actually operating without you even realizing that it's operating. Your brain is always operating. Your brain is always taking in information. So what do we need to do with that? Well, we're going to become aware. Awareness is key, but implementation is the door that leads to culture change. We can say we want to do things all day long, we want change all day long, but until we actually do something, I want to not only be aware, I also want to acknowledge so that I may take action. Got that? I don't want to just be aware, I also want to acknowledge so that I may take action. When we begin to take action, we begin to actually see the culture change. One of the things that we have to also understand is that this is not a one and done thing. It's not something we can kind of engage in one time and then run out the door and everything changes, or our world totally changes because of the information that we have here. No, it only changes when you make a conscious decision, an intentional decision to change. And that's exactly what we want to do today. So how does bias affect me? Why do I need to know this? Well, again, implicit bias are those attitudes towards people without being aware, whereas unconscious bias is being unaware of the behavior that's happening, being unaware of the behavior. So are you saying that I can actually have something in my subconscious or unconscious mind that's planted and even be nurtured throughout my life, and I can begin to act on what has been unconsciously there? Yes. We hear it all the time. We hear people say, I didn't mean to say that.
Or that's not what I meant. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure why I said that. Has anyone ever heard anyone say that? Most likely it's because something has been planted along the way in your life that has not been addressed. Anytime there is something that is unhealed or untouched, if you will, at some point in time, it is going to come up. When we are made aware of our own hidden implicit biases, a type of cognitive correction takes place, and we're able to implement more controlled, unbiased behavior. What I'm saying there is, again, everyone has bias. And so when we understand that we have bias, now we have an opportunity before us. That opportunity basically says what we're going to do is we're going to disrupt the bias that comes in our mind, and we're going to replace it with an unbiased thought so that we can make sure we remove that bias. Okay, so it has to happen. We first have to realize or recognize that we do have it, and once we do, then we have the power to disrupt it. So there are about, 18 maybe or so different biases. And I want to make sure that I just present a few of them to you and really bring it home in terms of what these biases look like. When we're talking about gender bias, what does that look like? Well, that's the act of favoring one bias over another. I prefer a woman to do this because women know how to clean or women know how to cook. And so therefore, I prefer that a woman does that. Or a woman is more nurturing or whatever the case may be. So we begin to have gender bias. We have a preference over male. Does that make sense? Yes? Talk to me. Okay. And then we have beauty bias. Now, beauty bias is someone that you may think is good looking or attractive. Therefore, you give them special treatment. So for instance, when I walk in the room, no, I'm just kidding. I was making sure you were listening. So when someone walks in the room and you think that they're beautiful, you're attracted to them, and you may want to actually, watch them along the way or along the day because they're so attractive to you. And someone else may be paying attention to you or trying to get your attention, but you're totally drawn by this person. They are at that moment your preference. That's a beauty bias. Then we have a halo bias. Now, a halo bias occurs when we allow positive impressions of a person in one area to influence all our opinions about the other area. I hear this a lot on the news when people say things like, but they're such an amazing person. I don't know how this ever happened. Has anyone ever heard that? Well, they may be an amazing person at work, but when they got into the community, they just turned, we don't know who they are. So one area does not mean the entire area. But so we put this halo over this person, and we begin to negate everything else that they may be doing because we believe that they are amazing in that one area. Then we have some more bias here. We talked about unconscious and implicit, so I won't go there. But affinity bias. This is definitely known because when people go to the same school, when people are in your same knitting groups or your same acting classes, you have an affinity. That means we are connected. We are connected by something. And because we are connected and we have that community, I prefer that person over someone else. We see this a lot in the HR field. We hire people based on the schools that they attend or the fraternities or sororities that they're in. That's affinity bias. So just make note of that. That's a bias. And then we have confirmation bias, which is the last one I want to bring up to you. Now, confirmation bias is the inclination to draw conclusions about a situation or person based on your personal desires, beliefs, and prejudices rather than an unbiased merit. And again, we see this type of bias a lot of times in stereotypes, where people are saying, hey, I believe that this person is this because of this. So if I say that, then what I'm saying about all of these biases is it's really about our preference. And if we are not guarded or not aware of our preferences, then they actually turn into prejudices. So when we are not aware of our bias, think about that, then they actually turn into preferences, which turn into prejudices. Preferences and prejudices. So we've got to make sure that we understand, again, we begin to disrupt that and feel as though we are empowered to disrupt that. So let's look at this. Let's look at this. How then, Kashonna, do I overcome bias? Because you've said that I have it, and I want to make sure that I do a better job at not only recognizing it or not only acknowledging it, but I want to take action now. I'm aware, I want to take action now. Well, we're going to acknowledge that implicit bias is human, and again, we all have it. One of the things I want you to do is take note of your first impressions. Ask yourself, is this a stereotype or a bias? What's going on here? Why do I feel this way? I'll give you one that I hear is common. When people call a customer service line and they hear someone with an accent. Or when people walk in a store and maybe they see someone with blue hair. Is your mind going? Again, these are things that we won't sometimes address because we don't think that there's anything really wrong with it. But I just want to, again, bring some awareness here so that we know that we have the power to disrupt it. So we want to set, those of you who work in human resources or you have an opportunity to interview people, set clear criteria directly related to the job and performance. One of the things that I highly recommend HR professionals do is to block out addresses. Why is that? Does anyone know? Yes. Where they live. You are absolutely right. Where they lived. Sometimes, people change their names on resumes because they don't want to be stereotyped. So we must make sure that we are aware of those things. The last thing here is stop, pause, and think before you make a decision. Practice mindfulness. And when we talk about mindfulness, we are talking about being in that moment and really, really being in touch with what's going on in your mind at that moment. Not what you're going to think about next week, not what you're thinking about once you come out of that moment, but really pause and think about what's happening in that moment. What's happening in me? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? What am I understanding this moment to be right now? Intervene when it affects professional effectiveness. We have a responsibility to hold people accountable, to make sure that if we see or hear unconscious bias, that we bring it to their attention. Because remember, it's unconscious. Sometimes people just don't know that it's happening. And so we want to depend on each other to make sure that we are holding them accountable. Get feedback and use data. That's another one. Encourage accountability. I've said that one. And then this is a good one that I, again, bring up in the corporate space because we have often said, is this person a good culture fit? How many of you have ever heard that? Is this person a good culture fit? And what I'm finding is that people are really shifting and they're saying, oh, well, we want people to be a culture add. Why? Because we want them to bring value into the culture, and it may be something that we don't have that they have. And I say, well, I understand what you're saying, but let me just give a small suggestion here. Is it possible that you can do both and instead of either or? Can you make sure that they're a good culture fit and a culture add? Why do I say that? Because you don't want someone who can possibly add something to your culture to come in and tear what you have built so hard up right before your eyes. It's just gone. So make sure that they are both a culture add as well as a culture fit. Now, here's some accountability for ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I'm constantly finding things that I am biased on. I mean, I'm a little biased when it comes to Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's. I'm biased. Okay, I know that there are some things I just need to work on. and that those biases sometimes are okay, but this self-accountability is definitely going to help us to recognize that bias. Ask yourself this: am I patient with others? Am I patient with others? If there is something that needs to be said, and I do this very intentionally, when I'm speaking with someone with an accent, I tell them if they're talking to me and they seem to be talking fast, if you don't mind, I want to capture everything that you're saying. Do you mind slowing down for me just a little bit? Because I understand that sometimes accent bias can get in our way and prevent us from getting to know someone. Do I make assumptions based on race, culture, or gender? It's very easy to do in this day and time. Are we taking the time to learn about individuals and their cultures? Have you been invited? I have this thing that I do. It's called ask before you ask. And what do I mean by that? Because one person may not be ready to represent the entire race. So before you ask them, make sure that you ask if you can ask. Is it okay if I ask you a culture question? And if that person says no, respect that. But if that person says yes, then go ahead and ask your question. But asking before you ask simply allows that person to prepare their minds for whatever is about to come their way. Allow them to invite you in. Don't just come and crash the party. Be invited. Make sense? Reprogramming our biases. I want you to do me a favor. Think about some messages that you received about race while you were growing up. And some of us say, you know, I was taught to love everyone. Okay, how have you maintained it? And some of you may say, I was taught to not trust anyone except my race. How have you maintained it? Or have you? Think about it. Number two, I want you to think about the gender roles you learned when you were growing up. And how does that play a part in how you see gender roles and responsibilities now? Does anyone want to go for it? Like, what were some of the things that you learned while you were growing up about gender roles? Does anyone have anything that you, yes? Yes, you pick up the plate for him. Why? Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? Yes. Computer programming and games only for boys. Wow. Yeah. Math is for boys. English is for girls. Right? Anyone else? Yes. Oh, girls had the responsibility for cleaning up after boys, but not being smarter. Oh, yes. If you have to clean up after a boy, you're definitely smarter. No, I'm just kidding. Yes. Yes, you. That you have to change your name when you get married. Ooh, you have to change your name when you get married. Yes, that's good. Oh, you could do anything. I love it. We've all been taught something, right? And so with that being said, what do we do when we come into a place where people think differently than we do? When they believe differently than we do? Now, here's the beauty of thinking differently and having different experiences. Does thinking differently mean that I have to agree with you? But what do I have to do? I do have to respect. Now, lastly, I want you to think of a time where you witnessed bias or discrimination. Maybe it was the job that you were going after. Maybe it was getting into a school. Maybe it was getting into a play or a program. How did it make you feel? And did you take action? Or did you allow yourself to just take it? Having that thought and feeling that pain is what so many people end up feeling so many times by experiencing prejudice and experiencing stereotype and experiencing bias. And the same pain that you feel, I'm sure you wouldn't want to feel again. And actually, you probably wouldn't want anyone else to feel that way. So let's reprogram our bias. Let's make sure that we're taking the time to be intentional about our efforts. Let's make sure that we're stepping back and we're pausing and we're thinking, we're engaging in our thinking before we're engaging in conversation. And doing everything that we can to treat people fairly. Thank you.